Tensions are rising between the United States and Venezuela. As the US sends more of its military assets into position off the Venezuelan coast, its opponent is scrambling to find any help it can get its hands on to counter the US threat. Russia has come to Venezuela's aid. And in doing so, it's made a catastrophically dumb decision that has massive ramifications for everything from the Ukraine war to Russia's relationship with the US. What was the insanely stupid thing that Russia just did in Venezuela? It gave Venezuela air defenses. On November 4th, the War Zone, or TWZ, reported that one of Russia's highest-ranking lawmakers has confirmed that Russia has supplied Venezuela with a host of air defenses. Worse yet, that same lawmaker suggested that Moscow could supply ballistic and cruise missiles at some point in the future. For Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, this news is amazing as he deals with a growing threat from US ships near his territory. Those ships are being joined by the American aircraft carrier the USS Gerald R. Ford and its accompanying fleet of destroyers, which were headed across the Atlantic Ocean at the time of TWZ's report. Back to what Venezuela is receiving, the lawmaker in question is the first deputy chairman of Russia's State Duma Defense Committee, Alexei Zaravlev. He has spoken to the Russian outlet Gazeta.ru to provide the details. Russian Pantsir S-1 and Buk M2E systems were just recently delivered to Caracas by Il-76 transport aircraft, Zaravlev told the outlet on November 1st. He also delivered a not-so-subtle threat to the US by suggesting that what he has revealed is far from all that Russia has sent to Maduro. Information about the volumes and exact names of what's being imported from Russia is classified, so the Americans could be in for some surprises, Zaravlev added. I don't see any obstacles to supplying a friendly country with new developments like the Oreshnik or, say, the proven Caliber missiles. At least no international obligations restrict Russia from doing so. The message being sent is clear. If the US keeps threatening Venezuela, Russia will provide Maduro with the weapons he needs to neutralize that threat. Whether such a neutralization can actually happen is irrelevant. What is important here is that Russia has laid out its stall and is being very vocal about its support of a country that the US is treating like an enemy. TWZ builds on these statements, noting that there is no visual proof to verify Zaravlev's claims about Pantsir S-1s heading to Venezuela. However, it's clear that a Russian Ilyushin Il-76 cargo plane arrived in Caracas on October 26th after following a circuitous route, Defense News said, included several stops in countries that are under Putin's sway. These nations include Cuba and Nicaragua. The plane returned to Moscow by way of countries like Algeria, suggesting that it may have picked up cargo to bring back to Russia after delivering its load to Venezuela. These deliveries, assuming they are of what the Russian lawmaker claims them to be, would add to an already strangely varied collection of Venezuelan air defenses. Before Russia's intervention, those defenses were primarily made up of older surface-to-air missile systems that have been upgraded over the years. Now, more modern systems appear to have arrived, and they have the potential to pose a serious threat to any aerial assaults that the US might be considering in Venezuela. And more could be coming. On November 12th, Newsweek noted that Russia and Venezuela signed a strategic partnership agreement in May. That partnership was only ratified in Russia in late October, suggesting that Putin has held off until a situation arises where it might be advantageous for Russia to provide direct support to Venezuela. Regardless, now that the partnership is ratified, Kremlin mouthpieces are coming out of the woodwork to suggest that more aid may be coming to Russia's grateful partners. Beyond Zaravlev's suggestions that Oreshnik and Caliber missiles may soon be on their way to Maduro, Newsweek says that the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, has started to become vocal. Russia is ready to fully act within the framework of the obligations that were mutually stipulated in this agreement with our Venezuelan friends, Lavrov said on November 11th. Venezuela has also expressed gratitude for the Russian help it has received thus far. The country's foreign minister, Ivan Gil Pinto, thanked Russia for its firm solidarity for the defense of our sovereignty on November 11th. Plus, Russia's foreign ministry has claimed that it's ready and waiting to respond to any more requests that come from Maduro and his minions in Caracas. What we see here is Russia throwing its weight around. By supporting Venezuela so firmly, Putin is trying to tell the US and perhaps more directly President Donald Trump that Russia is still a threat. Venezuela is essentially a proxy, a nation that Russia is using to move dangerous weapons in the vague proximity of the US. And if the threats of Oreshnik and Caliber missiles arriving in Venezuela end up being true, Maduro will have weapons that he can use to strike the US on its own soil. On the surface, this looks like a smart power play by Russia. It gets to arm an ally that could be a threat to the US while basically washing its hands of what that ally does with the weapons that Russia is providing. But if you remember what we told you at the beginning of the video, what Russia has just done in Venezuela is far from smart. It's insanely stupid, and as William Spaniel revealed in a November 7th video covering Russia's actions, There are 3 reasons why Putin just made a potentially catastrophic mistake. The first of those reasons relates to the country that has Putin's main focus since February 2022, Ukraine. Spaniel poses the obvious question, asking, what does it say if Putin refers to prioritize Venezuelan air defenses over the next most vulnerable targets in Russia? He has a point. The last few months have been a horror show for Russia when it comes to the scale and effectiveness of Ukraine's long-range strikes on its territory. Ukraine's attack on Russian oil refining alone highlights how effective the country's long-range drones and missiles have become. Energy Newsbeat produced a tally of these refinery strikes in a November 11th article reporting on yet another successful Ukrainian attack. It says that between August and the beginning of November, Ukraine has launched at least 58 attacks on Russian energy infrastructure, with 29 of those attacks targeting refineries. That works out to about 17 or 18 strikes per month, and this constant success tells us something important. Russia's air defenses aren't protecting its refineries well enough. Expanding the scope to all of 2025, Ukraine has completed more than 60 drone strikes on refineries, the same outlet claims. All told, it has hit half of the 38 major refineries in Russia, many of them several times, to cause shutdowns that have led to massive issues inside Russia. As of November 11th, Russia's gasoline production has dropped by 16.3%, with diesel declining by 37.5%, the outlet claims. There has also been a 30.4% drop in refinery throughput as a result of Ukraine's constant attacks. Euronews adds to this, noting on November 3rd that Ukraine's refinery strikes have impacted up to 38% of Russia's refining capacity. Ukraine's drones have also evolved to the point where they can fly for 1,000 kilometers, where they could only once travel 500, the outlet notes. Russia has lost 500,000 barrels of its refining capacity per day, and it's mostly happening due to the drones that cost as little as $55,000 each. We tell you all of this because we're building up to a couple of questions. What does Russia need to make Ukraine's long-range drones less effective? Air defenses. What has it just sent and claims it will continue to send to Venezuela? Air defenses. Russia's latest move is so monumentally stupid because it deprives itself of the very thing that it needs to have a chance of stopping Ukraine's long-range drones. Remember, these drones have already been extremely successful before Russia started sending Buk and Pantsir systems to Venezuela. With even fewer air defense systems at its disposal, Russia is making the key targets that Ukraine keeps hitting even more vulnerable. It's not like Russia's air defense situation is going to magically get better either. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, Russia has lost 1,242 anti-aircraft warfare units since Putin launched his invasion. That's a huge chunk of its stockpiles gone, either because the units have been destroyed directly or due to Ukraine taking out the radars that allow those units to detect potential targets. Several analysts have also noted that Russia now has gaping holes throughout its territory that are ripe for exploitation by Ukraine's drones. The Kyiv Independent reported on the opinions of 2 of those experts in a November 9th article. According to Sasha Bruckman, who is a military analyst with the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Russia has lost many air defense systems over the past 2 years, so it's plausible that there are many holes in their coverage that make successful attacks possible. George Barros of the Institute for the Study of War backs that opinion, adding, "Once you get past that initial shell around the theater in Ukraine, the rest of Russia has holes and vulnerabilities." Russia appears to have concentrated the vast majority of the air defenses that it has left that aren't already in occupied Ukraine around the capital city of Moscow. That makes sense. Protect the most valuable city, along with Putin, at all costs. But Russia is a vast country, and its resources are spread all over. By focusing on Moscow and Ukraine, Russia had already weakened itself to the point where Ukraine can carry out devastating drone strikes with seeming impunity. Now, with Russia sending air defense units it could have used to stop Ukraine's drones, even more holes are going to appear. Putin can't be ignorant of this fact, Spaniel says when speaking about how strange Russia's actions in Venezuela are. He points out that the information has to be filtering to Putin. The refinery attacks are publicly observable, Spaniel says. No one in the Kremlin is unsure about whether they are happening. And if you're unsure whether the information is filtering up there, remember that there are plenty of oligarchs who spend plenty of time in the Kremlin that are scared out of their minds about what's happening. They should be. Their pocketbooks are being torched just like their refineries. And Putin's decision to send the very systems that could protect those refineries to Venezuela isn't going to make those oligarchs any happier. That brings us nicely to Spaniel's second reason why Russia has just made an incredibly stupid series of decisions. Putin thinks he has the Russian public locked down, but he shouldn't be so confident. Spaniel points out that Putin seems to be operating under an assumption that at any other time during his reign would probably be correct. It does not matter whether the refineries are getting blown up and gasoline prices are surging, Spaniel says of what appears to be Putin's mindset. The Russian population is no threat to the Kremlin, and the Kremlin only cares about foreign policy, so the Russian people can just deal with it. There's a problem with that line of thinking, and it comes down to the gasoline that Spaniel mentions. Russia subsidizes gasoline prices for its domestic population in what Spaniel calls a sort of social contract that the Kremlin holds with the Russian people. The key mechanism it uses to provide this subsidization is something called damper payments. These payments are made directly to Russia's oil refineries as a means to encourage them to sell their products cheaply to the domestic market rather than chasing the higher prices that international customers are willing to pay. Thanks to these payments, along with a few other mechanisms, Russia's people pay less than they otherwise would for gasoline and diesel. Even as the prices of everything else in the country rise, that social contract helps to keep Russia's people subdued. Putin knows how important this damper payment is. That's why he suspended a reduction in the subsidy in October, with the suspension due to run until May. The problem is that this suspension isn't doing anything to help Russia maintain the social contract with its people that Spaniel mentions. Gasoline prices in particular have rocketed up since Ukraine started its intense refinery campaign, and they show no sign of coming back down. The shortages caused by Ukraine's strikes have pushed wholesale gasoline prices up by between 40% and 50% since the beginning of 2025, the Moscow Times reported on November 4th. Russia's refining output is also uncoincidentally 14% lower than it was before the Ukraine war, and is now at its lowest point since 2019. All of this links back to Russia's failure to halt Ukraine's refinery strikes. The damper payments aren't working anymore because they don't alter the fact that refineries are running out of gasoline that they can sell. Prices are still going up because of these supply issues, and those supply issues may not exist at the level that they do if Russia weren't so stretched on the air defense front. Again, sending air defenses to Venezuela at the point where the social contract Spaniel mentions has been broken could be enough to push what Putin views as a controlled Russian population over the edge. There is no guarantee. Russian authorities aren't shy about shutting down public protests, often with violence and prison sentences. However, Spaniel draws a comparison to Russia's fall 2022 partial mobilization for Ukraine to make a point about how Putin may be underestimating the strength of potential public reaction to the implications of Russia's decision to aid Venezuela with air defenses that Russia really needs. There hasn't been another mobilization since 2022, at least not officially. People are being mobilized, says the new Eurasian Strategy Center, but the Kremlin is achieving that mobilization by offering huge contracts to its soldiers. When the money runs out, the mobilization bogeyman that angered so many Russians in 2022 will have to come back around. That would spark a backlash, and the comparison that Spaniel draws appears to imply that we could see a similar sort of backlash start if Russia doesn't find a solution for its fuel crisis. That solution definitely doesn't seem to be send the one type of weapon that might be able to defend against Ukraine's drones to another country. By the way, Russia's fuel issues also affect its soldiers in Ukraine. They're not getting the gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel they need for their assaults, and they're dying because of it. Perhaps that's why some Russian generals are calling for Putin's head. According to an October piece by the National Security Journal, many of Russia's active duty generals and senior officials find themselves on a collision course with Putin over the consequences of his terrible military decision. One of their concerns is that Putin is obstinately clinging to the same set of maximalist demands he had since day one of the war, the journal claims. The lack of any admission of his mistakes or changes in strategy to adjust to the new realities on the battlefield troubles them. Despite the high casualties and other staggering losses, Putin's core objectives remain unchanged. Sending much-needed air defenses to Venezuela is just the latest in a litany of mistakes that Putin has made since he invaded Ukraine. Perhaps a combination of angered generals and a Russian public furious about a broken social contract could be the reward that the Kremlin reaps for its decision. That brings us to the third and final reason why Putin's decision to arm Venezuela is so stupid. It will inevitably anger Trump. Spaniel believes that Putin has just taken this step because he believes that the things that the US is doing around Venezuela aren't a complete bluff. The Kremlin likely doesn't believe that a war will happen, Spaniel is quick to add, but Putin is nervous that the US is threatening one of its proxies. What Putin is doing with this transfer of air defenses is attempting to give Venezuela more leverage if and when negotiations start. In crisis bargaining, the deals made to avoid war must be commensurate with the balance of power, Spaniel says. So the more power Venezuela has, the better it will do either in terms of a negotiated settlement or an expected war outcome. Weapons, then, are as useful in achieving a coercive peace as they are for waging war, Spaniel concludes. In other words, Putin is trying to get in the way of Trump throwing America's weight around. And for a man who prides himself on the art of the deal, a third party getting involved in his military-led negotiation efforts isn't going to go over well. Trump is already very frustrated with Putin. Months of attempting to bring peace to Ukraine have seen Trump get led down the garden path by Putin on more than one occasion. Russia's leader will tell Trump that he wants peace, only to continue bombing Ukraine while making no effort to actually achieve peace. Recent weeks have seen Trump become very public about how frustrated he is with Putin. On October 22nd, Trump called off a planned meeting with Putin in Budapest, with Trump declaring, "I don't want to have a wasted meeting. I don't want to have a waste of time, so we'll see what happens." Translation: Trump didn't think that Putin would be serious about anything he said during that meeting, so why bother holding it at all? This outward expression of frustration signaled a move that Trump had threatened for months. Just a day after the Budapest meeting was cancelled, Politico reported that Trump had implemented new sanctions that targeted two of Russia's major oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. Russia was left stunned by a move that could cost the country billions of dollars. Now it seems that Trump has turned his back on Putin altogether, leading to a more adversarial relationship between the two than we've seen at any point since Trump began his second term as US president. Russia sending weapons to Venezuela isn't going to improve that relationship. And with Trump so angry at Putin, Russia will also find itself continuing to fight a war of attrition that has killed or injured over 1.15 million of its soldiers and is now devastating its energy industry. After all, Trump isn't going to submit to Putin's maximalist demands for peace when Russia is actively aiding a country that the US has designated an enemy. Putin needs Trump on his side if he's going to get what he wants out of Ukraine without Russia paying an even heavier price in blood than it's already paid. Sending weapons to Maduro now is foolish. It only pushed Trump further away from Putin. Those sanctions we just mentioned are already causing major problems for Russia. As Putin makes stupid decisions about Venezuela, he's just been hit by a double blow that affects the oil refineries Russia is struggling to protect. One of those blows is related to Russia's air defense problem, with the other involving China's reaction to Trump's sanctions. Find out what both of those blows are in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more insight into the strange decisions that Putin makes in Russian foreign policy. And thank you, as always, for watching.